It's very cool because sometimes there's fundamental research that people are doing, which I think people often don't see the value in because there's not a direct application right now. But you have to have that fundamental research to be able to get to this point and to be able to build on it and create those applications. So understanding those crucial things about our world that we might seem very minute but can lead to these changes are something that can be one of the hardest things to communicate because there's not a and this could solve cancer, piece to it. But in 100 years, we could have this thing that you can't even imagine now because we've studied this really unique thing about cell biology or this really unique thing about combustion that creates cleaner engines potentially down the line. So sometimes it's worth studying things for the sake of studying things, even when you don't know that 30 years down the line, it's going to create that new communication technology.
All right, well, welcome everyone back to the Sean Trey Show. I have a really awesome guest with me today. Now, would you like to tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Winick Anthony, and I am a full-time science communicator. I've previously worked at MIT and NASA, sharing science, engineering, space stories. For the past 2 years, I've run my own business, Steam Power Media, sharing stories from everywhere from Astrolab, lunar rover companies, to zero-G parabolic flight companies, to Space Center Houston, and really being the storyteller and translator between all the technical stuff and the general public.
I love that. It is there's so much cool stuff happening. But when I watch like some of the press releases from, NASA JPL or other places, I sometimes am just like, I want to understand, but I don't always, and like so someone was explaining the Europa Clipper to me. And I was like, well, that sounds interesting when I read about it. But then when I had it explained to me, I was like, oh, that's awesome. It's and like when you're starting to have someone explain why it's awesome. There's so many concepts that we almost need them kind of translated to a level that we can understand. So it's really powerful that you're doing this. But what got you started on this journey? That's where I have a question.
Yeah, I grew up in Florida and during space shuttle era. So I grew up in Tampa, Florida. I could just go into my front lawn and see some shuttles lift off, which I think makes you feel very connected to space in a way that most people aren't. It feels very foreign and distant. But it's like, no, they're going up right there. There's people on those. So most of my family is either teachers or engineers, and I kind of found the sweet spot right in the middle. But I got a mechanical engineering degree because I've always loved making things, and I didn't know exactly the path I wanted to take. But I was always looking for the opportunity to combine my loves of writing, especially, and engineering, and not a lot of engineers were looking for that. And so I found this niche of being able to fill that people didn't want to do. So I started out doing things that were more in the engineering realm, much more focused. My first job, full-time job, was a associate editor of the future of work for MIT Technology Review, which is a mouthful, but basically looking at things like automation and robotics and how it was affecting things from the factory floor to the office. This was before we had ChatGPT, so we were looking at AI and stuff before it kind of hit the mainstream in the way it has now. So reporting on that sort of thing. So that's how I kind of got started into all of this. But I've found kind of like a path through it and following space and science a little bit more to explain the areas that I now get to jump between geology and biology and space all the time. And I think a lot of science communicators share that love of jumping between so many different places.
It is awesome. Like for Ilani's little world, we'll be talking about all of these different topics. And it's really fun. Like our next videos, we are doing a video on the scientific method. We just did one on
Hmm.
princesses. We just did one on whales because we went to Maui and got to see humpback whales.
Cool.
And then we're doing another thing on insects in the garden. And it's so much fun to be able to see these different things. And they're all fascinating. And it's just awesome. But you've had such a cool experience a journey because you mixed engineering, journalism, and
Hmm.
then science communication. Like
Yeah.
when you wake up every day, what motivates you to keep going down this path?
Part of it, selfishly, is I just have fun doing it.
Yeah, right.
I think like I'm someone who likes to work on 9,000 different projects at once, and I love being able to be like, okay, I really want to be able to work on this thing. I want to share this. And it's so fun to be able to go talk to the people who are passionate about this stuff and then be able to be their representative and share this because it helps them out, and like there's potential for them to get more funding for their project. It's really cool to see other people get excited by their science, and to be able
Yeah,
to share that is just so fun. And I went into engineering because I like making things. And even though I might not be in a machine shop like I was then, I'm still getting to make videos, do 3D printing, and like have that
that's
opportunity to
awesome.
create something every day. And there's just such a joy in that.
Yeah, that's beyond awesome. Well, can you share what it was like to tell stories about science on the ISS, the International Space Station? Tell me about that. It's awesome.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So I worked at NASA for about 4 years for the International Space Station program. And there are hundreds of experiments that happen every, 6 month period, which is every like expedition period on the space station. So we got to do everything from picking the experiments that we were highlighting that launched, returned, as they were being conducted up there, as well as when results were published, which ones we wanted to highlight and share those stories. And there's so much science that there was picking the right stories to tell, then how to tell them. So I got to do everything from look through all the images, like just as they came down of all of the research that was being conducted and what we wanted to make public and could help share these science stories. Assigning, editing, writing stories about this research. And I did a lot of social media content for them as a video. And again, just trying to find the right methods for telling these stories because some of them are very visual. Fire is a sphere in space and it's very cool. Others look like a silver box. And it's like, even though it's space and cool, you don't have that Instagram picture to hook people. So figuring out the balance of sharing the really visually impactful and the stuff that might not look impressive, but is very important breakthrough science. So a lot of those decisions as we went through, and honestly, super cool. I got to work in the same building as the astronauts. So you'd run into them in the elevator. And again, it goes back to when I was a kid. You just feel like you have that direct connection to space in such a unique way.
That's beyond awesome. Well, and, it's really cool that first of all, I've grown up loving space, but I have no idea how I never knew this. Fire makes a ball in space. That's awesome. Like I'm
It's beautiful.
literally sitting there thinking like I need to go search that and see what that looks like as soon as we're done because that's awesome.
Highly
Now,
recommend.
it's right. But what you pointed out is that some things aren't flashy. They're not easy to see, but they are really, really important. So that sounds like it's a real balancing act to sit there and think about what you need to share. Well, you've built your own company, SciChick, and now run Steam Power Media. Did I pronounce that correctly?
It's a Chic, but don't worry, everyone
SciChic.
pronounced it wrong back then, and I was very glad to not have to say the name anymore after I did it.
That's
Yeah, so
my bad.
you're fine.
What were the biggest lessons from founding those ventures?
Yeah, so I'm really glad Chic is a company I founded in college that made 3D printed science and engineering inspired jewelry and paired it with educational materials,
Nice.
which was really cool. I loved being able to, at the time, there weren't as many 3D printers around in every library and school. And to be able to give people something that was 3D printed, it was an educational piece as well as like the design it was based on, as well as the manufacturing technique. But it was really cool to be able to, I was in engineering school, but this gave me experience starting my own business. Even though it wasn't anything hugely grand, I learned about everything from the boring stuff of sales tax to, learning more selling and running your own business and what it takes. And so now going in to start Steam Power Media over 2 years ago now, I felt so much more prepared for it. And it wasn't as intimidating. So it was one of those, I'm so glad I did that in college. I learned almost just as much from that as, getting my degree. And now I feel like I was better prepared to just kind of hit the ground running. And I started Steam Power Media while I was still at NASA. I've always done work on the side, and honestly had just been growing so much. And at NASA, you have to worry about things like conflict of interest, and you still have a full time job, so you don't want to like take on too much stuff. But it was very cool to be able to ramp up my business to a point where I was like, okay, now's the time to leave and make the jump and go out on my own and do this.
That's really awesome. Well, one of the things that I was thinking is I have a 9-year-old daughter, and as I try to get her into STEM and to learn about these fields and engineering and science, um, there's really still a huge gender gap in engineering and science, and when I think about my daughter and her ability to go down one of these paths, we watched the movie Hidden Figures the other day, and she was just sitting there going, why is that lady, why does she have to go to a different path, or why does she have to do this? And, that was race based, but there was also a huge amount of gender, bias in there as well. Now, what role do storytellers play in shifting that narrative?
It's a great question. So, for me, in a lot of what I do, I always find the right people to feature on screen to tell these stories. So, picking the people that I think there's a great thing to be able to talk about girl power and like the very women STEM focused like TV shows and things like that. But I also think there's a lot of power in just science communication that features women, minorities without drawing attention to it. And so I think it's a balance of the two. I work with a show called CBS Mission Unstoppable, which features amazing women in STEM every weekend on CBS. And Miranda Cosgrove from iCarly is the host. And I think they do an amazing job of like really focusing in on that. But then also when I'm making content for whether it's a space company or for NASA, balancing out the people that we feature on screen and being conscious about that, so that we're putting more diverse faces out there and helping create those role models for, the little 9-year-old girl who might be tuning in.
Right. I love that. And it's like when we watched Hidden Figures, my daughter was like, she was just blown away, and she was like, so if I study science, I can be one of the people that makes change like that. And I was like, well, why, how was she making change? And she was like, she was the best person in the room, she was the smartest person in the room. And I said, isn't that, and that's powerful, that. And I said, well, how about, like, what if someone hadn't have given her a chance? Like, I love how they start that movie right at the beginning, where you have people taking a chance on her, and you have her family sitting there going, well, should we take her to this other school? They could have just as easily said, no, we're going to stay here. We're going to keep her in this place. And, you know, history would have been so different. But you have to take the chance on these people. And like, for a father of a 9-year-old daughter, I want more people looking at that going, wow, we really should be taking chances on a lot of different kids.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's so many great programs out there that are trying to create those pipelines now, even more so than, when I was in school. And I feel like I hope they can be more elevated and known more publicly, because sometimes you have to be in the right circles to be able to be aware of them. I'll shout out like Brooke Owens Fellowship is a fantastic program for women in space and aerospace that are planting, women in these great internship roles at fantastic space companies and organizations, from communications jobs to engineering jobs. And I think that's one thing that people also get hung up on sometimes, is you don't have to be a STEM major to contribute to space. There are so many other jobs and things like that too. So you can still be passionate about space, but also love communications or sewing, whatever it is, and find your home in some of these STEM industries and supporting these things too, depending on what your interests are.
I love that you point out sewing. I saw this documentary about the team that was sewing all of the different like materials that went into space, and it was
Yeah,
just so
yeah.
fascinating, so absolutely
They're
fascinating.
so cool. I know when you walk through at Johnson Space Center, which is where I previously worked, Building 9 is where they have all the mock-ups of like the International Space Station and the different spacecraft that you can go on. There's sewing machines on the floor there that they use for, creating some of the different soft material bags and things like that. There's also full labs, but it's just cool to walk through this place that's very, hardware space focused. And then there's some sewing machines on a table over there.
That's absolutely awesome. Well, you worked with everything from NASA to Zero G to Meow Wolf, which is absolutely awesome. Now, what
Yeah.
does that say about how broad STEM can really be?
Yeah. As I mentioned, you don't have to, have a communications degree to go into STEM, but STEM can also apply to so many different areas. So, Meow Wolf, for an example, they opened a new location here in Houston. If you're not aware, they're like an immersive museum, art museum. And it was called Radio Tave, which is focused on like this futuristic radio station that gets transported to another like galaxy. And so I went like before they opened and like highlighted a lot of the different ways they use tech in their art exhibits. And I'm actually going again on Friday, which I'm very excited about. So I think there's a lot of ways to point out the tech and science in people's lives that make it feel more relevant. Um, And that was one of the things that I did when I was at NASA. I worked on a big project called the Benefits for Humanity Project, which is looking at all the ways that space station research has benefited us back here on Earth for at that point, 20 plus years of research. So I think, being able to showcase those ways that STEM is influencing all those different areas makes it brings it home and makes people feel like it's more accessible.
I love that. Well, how do you make, like, one of the things that talking about making it accessible, how do you make these technical topics feel engaging for wide audiences on social media? Because sometimes they're not, that accessible. Sometimes they are topics that are very difficult to comprehend. I was trying to talk to some students I had about how wild and crazy black holes are. We were looking at an image of a black hole, and, like, we were looking at, like, the disk on top, and I was like, well, that's actually coming from behind the black hole. What you're seeing is the back of the black hole. And they were just like, it was mind blown, and I was trying to simplify it, and I was horribly failing. It's really hard sometimes.
Yeah, it depends on the area of science because again, some of them are more visual and you really need that picture, that animation. When in doubt, trying to figure out the way to pull human stories into it is always very helpful. So, when I can figure out the way to bring in a scientist who's really passionate about it and you can see their excitement, sometimes you just need the tone to shift a little bit, and see someone else who's like, oh, why do they care so much about this? Using comparisons, metaphors, similes, things that can, distill it down and give people something to relate to is always very helpful. Any in-person demos that you can do, or makes even, 3D print a model that someone can hold something in their hands to be able to see what that thing looks like. And I think really sometimes figuring out the details that you need and the details that you don't need to get across what you're trying to share. Sometimes scientists feel like they have to use this one jargon word that is really throwing people off, or sometimes removing that from the situation helps so much. And most social media videos are 90 seconds or less. So, like, what needs to be here to get across this point I'm trying to get? Maybe if they're really interested, put all the rest of the info in the caption and you can let them dive deeper. You can direct them to a YouTube video and other sources, but figuring out the pipeline to, like, get the interest, then share more information, and then how can they dive even deeper to be able to kind of get them into the topic.
I love that. Well, which begs the question: what is your creative process when designing content that mixes fashion, tech, science, all that? How do you do your what's your secret sauce, I should say?
My process, yeah. So, my areas of expertise are microgravity science and engineering, but I share on a lot of different topics outside of that. I sailed on an ocean expedition last year that was very geology focused. The people expect me to know a lot about astrophysics, and that's not my area of expertise. I know microgravity science and space and human flight more. So it depends on, like, if I'm starting in a spot that I'm really comfortable with, or if it's an area that I do not have a familiarity with, because I need to do a certain amount of reading to get up to date on a thing. So doing my own research, looking at, reputable websites, recent things that have been published on the topic is usually a starting point. And then if I have access, talking to the experts on the thing. And I even will sometimes, run certain comparisons by them, and see the thing that they really want to point out and share and are excited about. Figuring out when it's right to have me be in front of the camera sharing that story versus have them in front of the camera, or both of us in front of the camera. Like, what's the right medium to do that? And if it's them, how to get them to be able to be excited on camera and share something in a more accessible way. And so sometimes it's a mix. So, like, is there me delivering some intro lines, cutting to them for a couple quotes, coming back to me to explain, and, like, piecing it all together. And so usually it comes from me doing this prep, figuring out the questions to ask if I have that opportunity for an interview, what visuals I need to create or do. So I just came back from 3 of these parabolic microgravity research flights this past week. So that's what's on, like, the top of my head. And I got to fly with a bunch of scientists who are conducting their research on these flights that go up and down about 30 times. And then you get microgravity at the top for 30 seconds. And I was interviewing them before and after flight, as well as like delivering scripts when I was like floating next to their research, and like then coming home after you've got this big bucket of stuff and then trying to edit it into the right format. If it's video, of course, writing a little bit different with inserting quotes and descriptions and things like that.
That's awesome. Well, you've inspired me. I took Ailani indoor skydiving and she loved it. And I was like,
Okay.
oh, we need to do the parabolic flight as well because
It's
it just
so
looks so
cool.
awesome. Yeah,
Yeah, put that on your bucket list. Especially, I think she's old enough now, so she can do it. So
that's awesome. You have to be what, 8 or 9?
8, I believe. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, what was it like the first time that you went?
It was so I worked on microgravity research for, more than 4 years before that. And so honestly, it was just such a joy to be able to experience this environment that I've like studied and told stories about for so long. It was, I don't know, it just felt like a full circle moment, and it felt very emotional and meaningful at the same time. My first one I got to fly on was a public flight, so not a research flight, because I was looking at doing work with Zero G, and they were like, "Hey, we had a business meeting. Do you want to? We have an empty seat the next day. Do you want to go?" And I was like, "Yes, that is a dream come true." And so I was kind of like a combination of trying to live in the moment and document it. And now I've gotten to fly 6 times, but I try not to take any of those parabolas for granted. And the fact that I'm still getting to experience that over and over again, it's very freeing and so cool that it has such scientific applications too.
That's absolutely awesome. Well, I'm going to have to do some research and find out where and how and all of that good stuff because zero gravity is what I'm talking about. I grew up, I also like actually, I didn't grow up in Florida, but I think my great aunt lived in Florida. So we were always down in Orlando and I would go watch the space shuttle launch all the time. And it's absolutely fascinating. Like when you're standing there and this rumbling, powerful thing is just going, it was so powerful to watch. And I love that you point out when you're seeing it, I, for my daughter, we'll sometimes watch a rocket launch on TV, but it's distant. It's far away. When you're seeing it right there in front of you, that's a whole different thing. That is a very different thing.
Yeah, and even coming back with there was a sonic booms when it came back in Florida, and even like living in Tampa, we had like a sliding glass door in my like, living room. The sonic booms would boom, boom onto that when it came back. So you not only had like a touch point when went up, you had a touch point when it came back there in Florida, which again, just that connection. It's very cool.
Very cool. Now, as someone with both engineering chops and creative flair, how do you balance those two sides of your brain in your work? The other day we were making Ilani and I interviewed a gentleman who is blind. And so we were talking about getting lost in the nebula where we couldn't see and our machines shut down. And so we were having to call our galactic space expert who understood not using visual sensors. And we started talking things. The reality is that, nebulas are so diffuse. It's not like dense, and you totally can see where you're at. But I had to balance a little bit of the science with the story we wanted to tell. How do you balance things out?
I think I rely on both skill sets at different points, but at your core, engineers need to be creative, and I think the best engineers are extremely creative in what they make. So, I think my engineering background really helps me. I can talk the jargon with the technical people, and then I can that creative part then helps me change that into the story that I want to share. And I've always been someone who was making Legos and Rube Goldberg machines in my parents' living room and sewing my Halloween costumes. So I think that's a part that comes naturally a little bit of like, I love the creative part. And whenever I can go, oh, what's the funny thing that helps change this? And sometimes, like constraints create creativity. So whether it's how can I create this for Instagram? How can I create this for an in-person thing? I have this cool opportunity. What's the best way to take advantage of it? So chasing that creativity whenever you have it. If I have long-term projects or things I'm working on or people I'm working with, I'll have up things that'll come up in life where I'll just like have ideas, like similar to like an author having like something they need to go write down their story idea, that sort of thing. I'll be like, oh, this is a way that I need to be able to share this microgravity story. And then I have a massive like book of video ideas on my desk over here that I'll come back to when I have those times where it's the opportunity to create the thing.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. Now, I want to ask you this. Well, why is STEM literacy important for the next generation? Why should we be teaching, kids about STEM and science when AI is becoming so huge? And why should we even focus on STEM?
Yeah, I think STEM and all of the things that encompass it, sometimes we have an acronym and you don't think about all of the stuff behind it, but oh my gosh, just an understanding of how our world works is so important to making decisions in your everyday life, whether you go into science or not, and understanding where all of the things in your life have come from and the research that has been required to make that happen. And sometimes people might be upset about something that they don't have in their everyday lives, and they don't realize it's because this research isn't funded to create that thing anymore. And so, like, understanding the value behind the research that's being done and what that is changing and has the potential to change in your life is really crucial. And so whether it is, the knowing about the birds in your backyard and how your ecosystems might be being affected, to how space station research has affected a Febreze product that's in your closet. Like, there's that huge range of like impact, and just having an understanding of that value is so crucial.
I'm flying from Vietnam to the USA tomorrow. Flying, and we go multiple times a year, and it's really awesome. But one of the things when I first went from San Francisco, my first flight over to Vietnam, this older plane, and it was bumpy. It was really bumpy, and I mean, like the whole flight, you're just like you're feeling it
Yeah.
as you fly. But then I rewound, or fast forward to today. The last time I flew out to Maui on this big A380, this giant double decker airplane that has all of these new materials that make it. It. There was a point that I woke up in our flight, and I was like, I thought we had landed because it was so smooth. This
Wow.
plane was just flying through the air so smooth that it was shocking to me. But then you rewind a short time ago. And to go across the Pacific, you had to hop across islands. You
Mhm.
would fly here, stop there, refuel. And I love those those scenes in the old Indiana Jones movies where it shows the plane and the plane's going boom, boom,
Yes.
boom as it does this zigzag across the map. And I was like, and I went as a child, I was asking, hey, what are those little? Why is it zigzagging? Well, it has to land there for fuel, and then it flies to another place. And these little things that we do not think about are powerfully changing our world. Yeah, I remember when I first moved to Vietnam, 2001. I moved back to the USA for a while, but 2001 I moved here, and there was no FaceTime, there was no Zoom, there was no nothing. At that time, when I wanted to make a call home, I would walk up to this one phone because the regular phones in the house would not make international calls. You had to go to a special phone,
Wow. Yeah.
right? And then I would go to, and it was like $1 a minute. So I'm like calling my mom. I was like, Mom, I love you. I am okay. Everything is good. And, and then click, we were done with the call.
Yeah.
And what was fascinating is that before that, if people wanted to connect with people for a longer period of time, they would record cassettes. Hey,
Sure.
and they were like recording the cassette. I just want to send you this cassette to tell you. And they would tell stories. It's fascinating that now we're sitting here on opposite sides of the world, recording in high definition, high quality, and that's 20 years. What will it be like in 20 more? But the things that are forcing our world are moving forward and allowing us to adapt. It's all STEM. It is all STEM. And it is really, really amazing individuals putting in the work to create this system that allows us to have probably the best quality of living that any humans have ever had, you know?
Sure. Yeah. And It's very cool because sometimes there's fundamental research that people are doing, which I think people often don't see the value in because there's not a direct application right now. But you have to have that fundamental research to be able to get to this point and to be able to build on it and create those applications. So understanding those crucial things about our world that we might seem very minute but can lead to these changes are something that can be one of the hardest things to communicate because there's not a and this could solve cancer, piece to it. But in 100 years, we could have this thing that you can't even imagine now because we've studied this really unique thing about cell biology or this really unique thing about combustion that creates cleaner engines potentially down the line. So sometimes it's worth studying things for the sake of studying things, even when you don't know that 30 years down the line, it's going to create that new communication technology.
I loved, I grew up on Star Trek: The Next Generation, and I
Yeah.
absolutely loved the science in there, and it was great. And one of the things that was fascinating to me was looking whenever they got sick, and they would go in, and the doctor would be like, "Hold on, shh, your cancer is cured." Like, what?
What? Yeah.
It's just like that. And like I've been following the research from I don't know, I can't remember the name, but of them looking at how they've genetically adapted gray wolves to resemble dire wolves. And
Hmm.
it's not bringing dire wolves back. I was
Yeah.
reading it's actually creating an animal that resembles the DNA of what a dire wolf DNA would look like, which is still absolutely fascinating
Uh
that they're
huh.
able to do this, you know? But one of the things too is like now they're sitting there, and that company, the team is also working to bring back the black rhino, or the northern white rhino, I believe it was the animal that it was. And it's fascinating that here we are at this place that it can absolutely fundamentally change everything. It's like in the future we might be able to have your eye color is now green,
Who
or blue.
knows? Yeah.
Who knows? But we can't even comprehend it because at this point in time, I was talking to someone the other day about the rise of AI. And one of the things is that they were like, oh, should we be this? Should we feel that? And I was like, right now, we're standing at this point in time like people were with the invention of the automobile. And they're like, what do you mean? And I said, when the automobile came out, there were whole areas of the world that we don't have anymore. Farrier. The most common job I believe in the US was a farrier person fixing the horseshoe or fixing the hooves and putting on the horseshoes, and doing the blacksmith. That's why the name Smith is so common
Right.
in America, is because people were doing these jobs. And if you could go back in time and talk to someone right when the automobile was coming out and saying, hey, got this idea I want to tell you about. And it's going to be in the future, but automobile detailing, drive-through car washes, okay, self-driving car. They're going to be like, what is that? They can't even comprehend that, you know?
Right. Yeah. It reminds me, I can't remember who said this quote, but one of a famous sci-fi writer said, great sci-fi doesn't predict the automobile, it predicts traffic jams. And
That's
it's like,
awesome.
I think that like that's what you're talking about. Like those people back then wouldn't have been able to do that, but sci-fi that helps us think about the future, it thinks that next step forward.
I love that. It's so true because it's that there is this way of viewing the world that will be. I remember as a kid when someone would talk, my dad would say, you know what in the future they're going to have? I said, what? He's like, phones will be able to have a camera in them. And I was like envisioning like this little tiny like picture and like, like screen that was going to be this really little thing and it was going to look more like a Walkman or something. And now I couldn't even comprehend, but yet what was it? Star Trek had these tablets that people were running around with, and they were just doing all this stuff on these tablets that was projecting all
It's
this
true.
information.
Yeah. It's
People,
it's pretty incredible. Star Trek predicted a lot of stuff.
right? Star Trek and The Simpsons, man, in different ways, they're dialed in to
Both of
crazy
the
things.
two.
Both of them, right? If you could redesign science education from scratch, go back at it, what would you change to make it more inclusive and inspiring?
That is a big question.
Loaded,
Well,
right?
I think I know, right? Make it as hands-on as possible,
I love that.
from early on. And because I think the things that I liked most about any type of science experience I had, the thing that hooked me was like ranging from biology, I think it was middle school. I grew up in Tampa. We had something called Nature's Classroom where like every single kid took, it was like a 4-day like field trip. It was like we went back and forth every day, but it was like learning about taking samples from water. We went on like little boat trips around this like area. And it was like, I think especially for I grew up hiking with my parents, and like that was like an activity that was every vacation was we went for hikes and stuff. But for kids who didn't have an exposure to that, like to be able to see nature and biology and like these science careers that all these people had, that was like a big experience for everyone who went through Hillsborough County schools, ranging to all my labs in college. Those were the best experiences I had. Design and manufacturing lab is what solidified for me that I wanted to be in mechanical engineering. I got to learn to use lathes and mills and weld for the first time and make the stuff that we had been designing, which also gives you an appreciation as a design engineer of what manufacturing floors go through. And so you're not designing something that is unmanufacturable, and you understand what people have to go through. So as much as you can, make it hands-on. I think that's just like we were talking about, figure out the thing that hooks people. And, especially with trying to give kids problem solving opportunities early, because at its core, engineering is a degree in problem solving and figuring out all the tools you need to be able to do that. And then I would say, as much as you can, bring in active scientist role models that showcase what studying this leads to as your career, ranging from working as an engineer at a space company to working in a lab, to working, at a makeup company on chemicals and things like that. So I think because oftentimes there's always that question of how am I going to use this in real life? It's like, well, you won't have to, but you can. And doing that can lead to this very, very cool opportunity.
I love that. I remember when I was younger in high school, I had a teacher and he was awesome. He made science awesome. He made biology awesome. He made chemistry awesome. In the classroom, we lived out in San Diego County, and he had all of these different rattlesnakes that people found on the property, and they were going to like, oh, kill that thing. And he's like, no. He would bring them to the classroom, and he had a really good setup that was very safe. And he would keep them for 2 weeks so the students could see
Huh.
what it looked like to see a real rattlesnake, and then he would drive them out and release them into a safe area.
Wow.
But seeing these rattlesnakes, and probably can't do that now, but seeing them
Maybe. But
in the classroom was absolutely awesome. And to see these beautiful animals that were feared and people were terrified of them. But when you saw them up close, suddenly it wasn't a monster anymore. It was just this beautiful thing. And he inspired all of us. Chemistry. We, at my school, everyone's like, oh, it's so boring. And then he was going through the lab one day, and he pulled out some old things from the '60s that he found in there. He's like, ooh, what's this? He's like, sodium. Let's go to the lake, everyone. And so he took us out to the lake, and he showed everyone what happens when sodium and water mixes. He did it as safely as he could. But it was absolutely awesome. And, suddenly after that, I was like, dude, chemistry is pretty rad. I didn't know that there would be an explosive reaction when sodium and water mixes. And we had all of these other things. If it was now, he would be the science teacher that was doing like the elephant toothpaste experiments in the
right.
classroom. That would be him. But it was an educator who sat there and said, this is something that people don't understand how cool it is. And I'm going to make sure that they see that. And I'm going to make sure that they get it. And he was hands down the most popular teacher on campus because he made stuff that was traditionally not fun. And then on the flip side, I had two math teachers at my school who were kind of over their jobs at the point in time that I came through school.
Hmm.
And they were just going through the motions, extremely intelligent people. At one time, were probably really good teachers, but by the time I got there, we're just kind of over it. And subject that I loved in grade school, math. I loved math. I was good at math. And then suddenly, after these teachers, I fell so far behind. And it was like, and I'm not hating on them, dude. I've taught too. I know what burnout is like. I know that feeling. But at the same time, I think giving people the tools to sit there and go, how can we make this interesting? and inspiring the teachers, giving them give that man a bonus. That teacher that I was talking about, the science teacher, man, that guy should have been getting Teacher of the Year awards and getting trips to Bali or whatever else they needed to
Yes.
give that guy,
Totally. You said, what would you do to redesign science education? It's give teachers the tools to be able to do all of this easily, and have this be supported and not have to be someone who goes crazy above and beyond. And I'm sure spends their own time and money on making these experiences happen. What are the ways that you can support and give teachers these opportunities without them having to go leagues beyond what, their pay requires? So,
Exactly. And one of the other things, like, too, I'm just gonna put this out there. Pay people.
yeah,
Pay people
what a crazy thought, but
might be worth doing.
yeah.
So, exactly. And at the end of the day, teachers. I was blown away. I was looking at moving back to the U.S. and I was like, you know what? I would love to still teach. And when I was looking at a very good state, and they were like, yeah, teachers in the state are making $50,000 a year. And I said, a house in this state cost, a couple mil. And it was just, I was blown away that, and I'm not going to lean on it too much, but I really feel like if we want to have people that are innovating and doing awesome things, we need to do a little bit more and do a little bit more stuff that's going to stand out and just pop.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the fellowships that I've gotten to do through science communication, I'm categorized as an informal educator a lot of the time. So I've gotten to do some opportunities where I've gotten to interact with formal educators, and finding some teachers know about these big opportunities to go. For example, I'm going on an ocean expedition. A bunch of the people also going on these are teachers of like, yeah, all the teachers should be doing that. Go on an ocean
Yes.
expedition and be funded to be able to
Yes.
do that. These are the people that should be getting those experiences to be able to share back with those classrooms and be able to live stream from the ship and show these kids these experiences.
Yes.
Because maybe you can't send 30 kids on a ship, but, treat these teachers and give them some of the opportunities that some, influencers and YouTubers who are doing science stuff might get, and then they
Right.
can influence these people for decades too.
Light the spark. Light the spark. Because, if that teacher who got to go on that boat and science expedition comes back to the classroom, they're going to be like, you know what I just did? I'm going to tell you. And,
Yeah,
it's like
yeah,
when I went
exactly.
to Maui and I got to go on, sorry, I got to go on this boat with all of these humpback whales. And what was wild for
Yeah.
me is while we were there, um, this mother and calf kind of decided that they thought our boat was interesting. And for 45 minutes, she and the calf circled the boat. The calf was just coming around, flapping and hitting it with its flippers. And the lady that was doing the tour said, I've never seen this. And we can't move. We are literally not allowed to move while these two are this close to us. So just sit back and enjoy until they're done. This is where we're at. And I came back and I had never been that close to a whale. I'd been whale watching and seen them in the distance. But when this mama whale was looking at us and the level of intelligence that she had, I looked down in the water and she was looking right back up at me. And I just was like, oh, wow, that is a conscious, powerful creature that is taking us in. And it was mind blowing to me because I've been around dogs and cats, but I've never been next to an animal that's taken me in like that. And in her environment, I was, certainly I've seen gorillas and chimpanzees that are also intelligent, but they've been in our environment. This was different, and that fire was in me, and I came back and we made a whale video. You know,
Yeah, absolutely. That's so cool. It's just like seeing those shuttle launches. It's like you need that thing that
yep.
creates that spark and makes something feel accessible and real.